guys, it's Chloe. Welcome back or welcome to my channel. On my third generation Toyota Tacoma over here, I plan to install a lot of powered accessories, and I already have a few, like a front camera, an ARB air compressor, and if you remember from my front bumper install video a while back, I had an unfinished cube light wiring project. Anyways, even though adding 3 accessories may not sound like a lot, let me tell you that the wiring can get really messy, really disorganized, really quickly. And so because I plan on adding even more accessories, I thought the best way to clean this up and the safest way to clean this up would be to add an auxiliary fuse block. Now I can have a centralized and safe place where all my accessories in my truck can get power. This project is a work in progress. I only have one accessory, my cube light for my bumper, actually wired into my auxiliary fuse box right now. I eventually need to move my air compressor and possibly my front camera to the fuse block as well. But I think this is a good start, and I want to show you guys what I have in today's video. Something else I also added while I was doing this project was adding a customized OEM-style switch panel on the inside of my truck. Okay, so this is a pretty big DIY project, so I have a lot for you guys in today's video, but to give you a breakdown, first I'm just gonna give you a detailed overview of how my system works, basically like a high-level overview of my fuse blocks and how I power all my accessories. And then at the end, I'll show you guys step by step exactly how I built my fuse block auxiliary power thing, and of course, how to wire up an accessory in case you're interested in doing something like this and you wanna follow along. I'm sorry in advance, guys, but I am absolutely geeking out about this little project here. I don't know, maybe it's kind of like the same psychology behind building IKEA furniture, even though the furniture itself isn't that impressive. Because you built it with your own 2 hands, you feel like it is, and therefore you like it more. That being said, I am by no means an expert. I am an engineer, but I write software, so that wasn't super helpful for this particular project. But basically, what I'm trying to say is that this was very much a DIY thing, and this is my version 1, and I have some ideas after having done this thing about how to improve it, and there will be a version 2. Either way, I'm happy with how this turned out, so let me give you an overview. First up, I added this fuse block. It's by a company called Blue Sea, and let me take off the cover so that you guys can see it. So this thing has 12 circuits you can hook up to it, and if you don't know what a fuse block is, basically if you're running a ton of accessories, you're gonna quickly end up with a ton of wires running directly to your battery. And not only that, you definitely want some protection in the event of an overloaded circuit. So this fuse block can organize and centralize the power for all of my accessories and protect them. So this particular Blue Sea fuse block came with a 15 amp fuse. As you can see, I don't have it hooked up to anything. And as I stated earlier, to this fuse block, I actually only have a single accessory installed, my bumper lights. I don't remember exactly where I got my 2 cube lights from. I think they're Pro Comp. They were just sitting in my garage originally. I couldn't find a part number, so I didn't know their amp draw, but LEDs don't draw a lot of current to start out with, and I know these ones don't because they had 16 gauge wire coming out of them. So I could have probably just went with a 5 amp fuse, but I don't think 10 is too much. Anyways, I don't want to get too much into the specifics of this, but if you guys do this, please make sure you're properly selecting fuses, your wire size, etc. So that is the Blue Sea fuse block in a nutshell. I think they sell a 6 circuit one for like $10 less. And honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think I need more than 6 circuits, so that would have probably been a better choice. I could have saved some space over here. But the 12 circuit one isn't a bad deal. Like I said, I think it was just $10 more on Amazon. So yeah, that's what I went with. The next thing I have over here is my circuit breaker, which is also from Blue Sea. So this is a 100 amp circuit breaker for protection. So I have this wired up to my battery, and then the other end, of course, is wired up to my fuse block. Now that I'm thinking about it, I probably should have went with an 80 amp instead, since again, my accessories don't draw a lot of current. I'm guessing most of the stuff that I'm gonna be running over here is gonna be LED, but this fuse block is rated at 100 amps. What's nice about this is I can flip this lever and now there is no power going to my fuse block. So essentially I have a master switch if I want to. You'll see it during the install portion of this video, but while I was making essentially this whole fuse block, I used 6-gauge wire. Yes, I should be using 4-gauge, that was the original plan, but my local Home Depot didn't have that. They just sold 6-gauge wire by the foot. So I have some 4-gauge on order, but right now my LEDs, again, don't draw a lot of current, so I think I'm gonna be okay for now. Now, you're probably wondering how I mounted all of these things, and what I'm doing is I'm using a mount made by this company called Overland Equipped. Now, this mount right here is specifically made for the Toyota Tacoma, and it bolts down to the fender. And then on the other side over here, it's kind of difficult to see because it's pretty deep down into the engine bay. It hooks around an existing bolt. I picked this up from Amazon along with the other stuff because I wanted guaranteed fast shipping, but the company itself, I looked, has a website with more details about this product. But with this bracket that I have, it basically has cutouts for this exact Blue Sea fuse block, and I think also the 6-circuit fuse block fits into this mount, and it has holes cut out for the Blue Sea breaker as well. I did drill 2 holes to add 2 relays, and I plan to drill another hole to add at least another relay over here if I have more accessories, because basically if you have any accessories that you have a switch for in the cab, which is the case for my cube lights in my bumper, it is a very bad idea to have a hot wire running through the cab, so that is why I added these. This guy is not fully wired, but I have it here for future use, but this is the one I'm running. This is for my cube lights, and I'll show you the switch and everything inside in a minute, but I do like that there was some added room so I could add my relays. As you can see, my mount is black, and that's because I sprayed it with some black spray-on bed liner, but it does come raw brushed aluminum. The black gives it a better look in my opinion for sure, but there's another reason I sprayed it black, which kind of goes into something I'm going to talk about right now. This thing is pretty sturdy. When I shake it up and down and side to side, actually the entire truck shakes. However, I will say this, the edges came out pretty rough, especially the edges over here where the wires run up and connect to the fuse block. So I did quite a bit of sanding, especially along this area over here and along the edges, because I didn't want any of my wires to get cut and then short. So that, along with the spray on bed liner, definitely helped out to smooth the edges. Now I feel comfortable. I can even run my finger along all this and I won't cut my finger, whereas before I would say that was kind of the case. But probably the biggest thing is how close this mount is to the brake sensor wires. So the white wire over there is a brake sensor wire, and obviously right here, I know it's difficult to see because it is black, so I'll put my finger over here. Again, I can move it up and down, and I know it probably looks really close on camera, and that's because it's pretty close in real life too, and it won't make contact with the wire, and I severely sanded down this edge because it kind of made me nervous. To be fair, Overland Equipped addresses this issue in their instructions and warns you to not put this too close, or make sure you don't have this touching these wires. But for where the bracket mounts on this side, it's not slotted up and down, it is slotted side to side, so there wasn't much I could do, and this was the best I could get. It is kind of close for my liking, and I want your guys' help because I want to know if you guys think this is too unsafe. I did highly consider getting my cutoff wheel and cutting the bracket here and here, but then thinking about it more, this part adds a lot of support. So I don't think I could just cut this without losing a lot of structural support. Anyways, that is by no means me being negative about this mount. I really like it. I think it's a genius mount, but I had to mention this in case any of you guys were worried about it when installing your own. If you do, my other recommendation, again, is to sand down all the edges, especially these ones as well. With adding a new accessory, my bumper cube lights, I added this switch. So I have this switch from Cali Raised LED. It's an LED light bar switch that controls my bumper lights. And I know, my bumper lights aren't actually a light bar, but I guess this is a close enough match for now. So the way I wired my bumper lights were to only light up when the tail lights came on. My lights are completely turned off, so if I try to turn these on, nothing. Turn on my daytime runnings, still nothing, because as you can see, my taillights aren't on, but the second I get those taillights on, you can see the switch was already in the on position, so the bumper lights turned on. And that's because the taillights come on when the lighting in your truck is in that position, or if it's in the headlight position. And I'm not sure if you could hear it on camera, but you can actually in person, when the doors open, hear the relay. The one thing about adding OEM style switches like the ones I have over here is that you need spots for them. So if you have a lot of accessories like I do, you kind of have to go aftermarket, and it's really hard, even aftermarket, to find panels to add switches that look OEM and look factory and actually fit really well. So if you previously watched my front camera install video, I had a Miso custom switch panel with lots of cutout for switches. While that one looked really good and I was happy with the OEM factory style finish, my biggest issue with that panel was that I was gonna have to actually cut some existing plastic on my truck behind the panel if I wanted to add all of the switches that it offered, or at least fill them with blanks, which I did want to do that. Now, to be fair, you can order specific custom setups like Miso. Like you can get like a 2 tall switch setup with 1 small one or 2 small ones and 2 big ones, whatever. But for someone like me, I like to add things later on, not necessarily right now. And also in this present moment, I have no idea how many accessories I'm eventually going to have and how many switches I'm going to need. And it can get pretty expensive ordering multiple of these whole switch panels. And I absolutely love Miso custom products, but as many of you know, they are very hard to grab and they sell out quickly. So what you're seeing is a product I've installed after doing a lot of research, a lot of thinking, a lot of talking to different people. It solves all the specific problems I just explained, and basically I have installed this switch panel from a company called Guild Outfitters. Now, if you haven't heard of Guild Outfitters, definitely check out their website because they have a lot of Tacoma products, especially if you like doing modifications like this, like me. But for this project, I got one of their base switch panels, and they have a lot of different ones depending on the stock configuration of your truck or what you want. But then all of the base panels have these cutouts for adding modular inserts that you can add an insert to add on whatever switch configuration you might need. So to give you kind of an example, I have another one of their base switch panels that I got from their website here. This one's a little bit different than mine because, as you can see, my base panel has this horizontal rectangular cutout and then 3 small switch cutouts, and then it just has an opening for the modular insert, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But this base panel is a little bit different in that it has the horizontal switch cutout, 2 small switches, and then it looks like a large switch cutout, and then the modular insert is more on the left side over here. So I think that is super cool, and the modular insert that I got for my base panel was I wanted 3 short switches because I have 2 accessories right here, and I want an option for a third, but again, I'm someone who doesn't know yet, so I have a switch blank in that right now, but I have the option to add a third. But the point is, if I wanted a 4th switch, for example, I could keep my existing base panel and then just get an insert with 4 switch cutouts, which is just so cool. Now let's say that instead of having all these OEM switches like I do, you rather have like an aux beam or a Switch Pros. This base panel I have actually also fits an aux beam controller instead of adding the modular insert. Or if you have a Switch Pros, I think they also have a modular insert where you can put your Switch Pros in as well. So I know I've gotten into so much detail already, but if you want to see the entire process of me making up my fuse block and then wiring up my bumper lights and then adding the switch panel, let's get into that install right now. Let's start out with everything I used, which will be linked down in the description. So first up is the Blue Sea 12 circuit fuse block. Then I have a Blue Sea 100 amp panel mount circuit breaker, 2 12-volt relay switches, but I only needed 1 for my single accessory install today, and the other one is a placeholder for now. The Overland equipped fuse block bracket, and I mentioned that I painted it with spray-on bed liner. Yes, it's not perfect, but you really won't see the imperfections when all is said and done, and I also drilled 2 extra holes to fit my relays later on. Machine screws to mount everything to the bracket, a Guild Outfitters base switch panel plus insert, and my accessory switch from Cali Raised LED. There are quite a few other things I used in the video, like 6-gauge wire, 14-gauge wire, fuses, ATA circuits, wire strippers, heat shrink, a soldering iron, heat gun, electrical tape, all sorts of connectors for my wires, a multimeter. It's hard to list out everything, but hopefully this helps if you're following along. Before any project like this, I always try to design before I implement, so I drew up my own wiring diagram that you'll see me use as reference throughout my install. You can pause the video right now if you want to take a closer look if you're interested, but yeah, this is what I designed and this is what I'll be following. So first, I'm just mounting my circuit breaker and fuse block onto the Overland equipped bracket using my machine screws. I realized that my screws were too big for the mounting holes on the fuse block, so I drilled out my holes a little bit to get them to fit. The fuse block has 4 mounting holes and the breaker has 2, and then if you want to mount your own relays, you need a 1 hole for each of them. So since I was mounting 2 of them, I ended up needing a total of 8 screws, which I just picked these up at Home Depot. Unfortunately, they didn't come with the blue C. Then I got my 6-gauge wire, which Home Depot sells by the foot, and I measured, cut, stripped, and crimped down some ring terminals. Following my diagram, one reg goes from the fuse block to the breaker, then from the breaker to the battery, and then the other side of the fuse block is grounded. And you could see me placing the unit inside my truck temporarily to measure those power and ground wire lengths. When I was done with that, this might be a little excessive, but I like to make sure that I have solid connections as I go. So I whipped out my multimeter and tested for continuity where I expected it. Then here's this awkward shot of me being excited about building this. Now it's time to mount the relays, so I start out with one and I'm building up the wiring for what I can right now, again following my diagram, and then I'll finish up the switch wiring when the panel is mounted so that I can measure how long the wires for the switch need to be. I'm using some female spade connectors on my relay side and ring terminals on my fuse block side. And then there I go again with the multimeter to double check my work. To access the cube lights in my bumper, I need to remove the grill, so I removed 2 10mm bolts, a few plastic clips, detach my camera and sensor wiring harnesses, and then I can access the wires coming out of the lights. I stripped those down because basically I need to splice longer wires in and run them to the relay, so I decided on soldering, which was a little tricky to do with me having to fish my hands down in the bumper and having the camera sorta in the way. But anyways, after soldering, I realized that these lights were kind of in the splash zone of my truck, so I added some heat shrink to prevent any shorting while I was off-roading, and then used electrical tape to clean everything up and add another layer of insulation. Then with the long wires from these lights that run to the relay, I added heat shrink to make routing them a little bit more clean. Next, many would say that you should do this as a first step, but I wasn't too worried since all my wiring work was outside of the truck's electrical system so far, but I disconnected my battery and wrapped the negative terminal in plastic to prevent any shorting. I mounted my built-up panel, which is a little tricky to do, but the long end closer to the engine wraps around this existing bolt, and the other end mounts to the side of the fender with 2 provided bolts from the Overland equipped kit. Now, with the panel in place, I could tell how long the positive wire from the cube lights needed to be, so I measured, cut, and crimped my spade terminal on the wire and then plugged it into the relay according to my diagram. And you can see 2 circuits being used on this fuse block. One will be for our cube lights, but the other again is a placeholder and has the other relay partially wired up, which is why you see it. Also, I wired my ground for the lights on this panel, which is why you see an additional ground terminal on the fuse block. Okay, so now for the fun part, which is adding a switch panel. So I'm removing my existing switch panel, which was the Miso Customs 5 small switch one. And I've got a love-hate relationship with this Miso panel because while it looks so good, I really don't like the fact that you have to cut part of your truck to utilize the 2 switches at the ends, and also the switches and panel itself fit pretty tight, so they're hard to pry off when you want to do DIY stuff like this. And all those are reasons I'm going with my new one from Guild Outfitters. So I'm taking out all of my existing switches, which you just have to unmount the harnesses, then pop out the switches. And then here's a side-by-side of the Guild Outfitters panel versus the Miso one. Again, both are great, but I think the Guild Outfitters one is superior and much better for my needs. I add my modular insert, which was just a better match for me because now I only have 3 switch openings at the top, but when I add more stuff down the road, I'll go with the 4 switch opening modular insert. Then I just repopulate my switches. Next, I took the switch wiring harness, which came with my Cali raised LED switch, and off camera I extended the wires because one is going to go to the relay inside the engine bay, one is going to get grounded, and then the other one is going to go to the fuse panel underneath my dash. So I plug all of my switches in and then measure, cut, and add the appropriate terminals to the wires coming out of my new switch wiring harness. And then, since it's hard for me to bring my camera under the truck to show you the fuse panel in detail, I have the lid because it's easier if I just point to where I'm putting my ATA circuit, so I'm tapping into this tail 7.5 amp fuse. I chose this because I only wanted to be able to turn these bumper lights on basically when my headlights are on. And that sort of coincides with when the taillights are on, so this was just the best match. I add my new fuse and the original 7.5 amp fuse into my ATA circuit, then connect the correct wire on my switch to the ATA circuit, then plug that ATA circuit into my fuse panel where I removed the original 7.5 amp tail fuse. And I know that's sort of confusing and sorry for repeating this, but just follow the diagram and hopefully that will make sense. And if you're curious where I grounded my switch wire, I found this ground near the door seal on the driver's side, so I used that. Now we're almost done here. We just have to connect this last switch wire before connecting everything to our battery. And this goes into one terminal on the relay, so I'm just feeding it through the firewall. And then like all of my other wires, I'm measuring, cutting, stripping, crimping, and connecting. Then you're going to want to add your fuse into the fuse block, so I'm adding my 10 amp fuse to my circuit, which should complete it. And this is me being a little neurotic and checking all of my wiring with my multimeter again before I plug the battery in. Then I connect my battery. checked for continuity in parts of the circuit again because I'm psycho and really wanted this to work on the first try. And then I tested out by turning the truck lights on and pressing the switch. And I'm really happy everything worked on my first try. I didn't show it, but it's also a good idea to flip the breaker to make sure your accessory doesn't work too. So I tested that and everything was done. So I hope my install video helped if you're doing this or a project similar to this on your Tacoma. If you have any questions whatsoever or suggestions for me, definitely leave me a comment down below. I know how frustrating it could be if you're in the middle of a project and something doesn't work, so I'll do my absolute best to answer your comment. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you want to connect more with me, you can follow me on my Instagram. It's at ChloeKuoTaco. I post more in real time on there, and I was posting all my stories as I was doing this project. Anyways, thank you, and I hope I'll see you in the next video. Bye guys!